welcome to this tech talk about Multisig Evolution. This time, Barry and I will cover multisig wallets, what are they, and how they fit into our roadmap. Next slide, please. So, there are two categories of transactions in Ethereum. There is the classic standard transaction that we all know. This transaction is done by most clients like our status app, MyCrypto, MetaMask, etc. And they require only a single signature. And whoever has this private key associated with the address can control the funds. That means that you do not require approval from anyone to perform any transaction. Next slide, please. Multisig wallets is the other category. These require multiple partners to be in agreement to complete a transaction. Multisig wallets are represented by smart contracts and have this list of features you can see here. A list of approved addresses who act as owners of the multisig wallet, M of N signatures, which means that you need a minimum amount of signatures to do a transaction. The multisig wallet needs to be able to receive Ether and tokens. With this, any owner of the multisig wallet should be able to submit any request, like a transfer of value, executing a contract function, etc. Once a transaction is submitted, the minimum number of signatures are required to approve this request. Once this number of signatures is met, the transaction can be executed. And there are different implementations of multisig wallets that have of these features, like the one made by Consensus, which was improved by Gnosis. OpenZeppelin also has an implementation, and Parity also has one that is infamous by its hacks. Next slide, please. Now, you might be asking what's the point of having a multisig wallet? So let's see a couple of examples, like the personal use cases. We have here 4 basic scenarios. The first one, which requires a single signature out of 2, a husband and a wife, a petty cash joint account. The signature of either spouse is sufficient to spend the funds. The second scenario, a saving account of a married couple, both signatures are required to spend the funds, preventing one spouse to spending the money without approval of the other. The third use case, the parent saving account for a child or for a kid. The kid can spend the money with the approval of either parent, and money cannot be taken away from the child unless both parents agree. And the final use case, 2-factor authentication wallet, where one private key is on your primary device, like your computer, the other can be on your phone, and the funds cannot be spent without a signature from both devices. This is much more secure since both devices must be compromised to install the funds.
Okay.
Okay. You want to?
Yeah, sure. So I'll talk a little bit about now some of the use cases from the perspective of an organization, especially since status is an organization. So we are thinking about how does a multi-sig wallet play into what status is trying to do and where status is going. But in general, when you think about how organizations have to do things, especially around finance, here are a couple examples that apply, right? Let's say you have a board of directors, for example, let's say 3, but it could be more. But just to make this a simple example, you have a board of directors of 3 maintaining the funds for the organization, and those funds can't be spent unless 2 of the 3 directors agree. And again, bigger multi-signature transactions are possible for bigger organizations, maybe 3 of the 5 signatures or 5 of 9, etc. Now there's also, let's say, buyer seller with a trustless escrow. So there's three parties involved: the buyer, the seller, and the escrow. Buyer commits money with this and with the seller and a third party arbitrator. If the transaction goes smoothly, then both buyer and seller sign the transaction to forward the money to the seller. If something goes wrong, they can sign a transaction to refund the buyer. If they can't agree, they both appeal to the third party, who will arbitrate and provide a second signature to the party that it deems deserves it. And the arbitrator can't steal the money, as they only have one key. Decentralized cold storage vault. Of course, we hear about how exchanges are hacked. And this is really, and usually when you hear about it, it's because they weren't keeping their funds in cold storage. They usually were keeping in some kind of a hot wallet. But the other issue with cold storage is who's going to hold the key. So you could have a multi-sig cold storage wallet where one of the keys, let's say, for example, is held in one location, the other is like in a bank safe, and copies of the third key are distributed in a different physical location, right? So even if any one location gets compromised, the key is not, it makes the attack vector much harder, right? So the home vault, for example, is not vulnerable to raiding or burglary because spending the money requires a visit to either the other location, the bank, the office, or whatever the case may be. Also, losing access to one of the locations, maybe in the case of like a fire or a flood, doesn't mean you've lost access to the funds as well. So from an organization perspective, that's like a good like disaster recovery strategy, is to have a multi-sig wallet and not have the requirement of all three portions of the key to access the funds. And also, like with exchanges, you could just use it for improved hot wallet security. Businesses need to have, or organizations and businesses need to have funds that they can disperse periodically. And they may want to have multiple people for certain types of transactions involved to disperse those funds, rather than just having one person who's basically in charge of that. And again, that creates all kinds of risks, right? From operational to security to, you can basically use your imagination and figure out all the different ways that you can start to mitigate risks once you get away from one person being responsible for dispersing all funds in a wallet, or having the ability to. Okay, so I mean, the reason we started talking about this, and the reason this talk even came about, was we started using multi-sig wallet. I mean, Status has been using multi-sig wallets from the beginning since it's like token sale, to manage those assets. But now that we're starting to move towards bringing dApps towards mainnet, and we're testing things out and creating simulations of how the actual dApp might run, we start to think of these scenarios where how are we going to actually manage these contracts? Often, when a contract is deployed, some address, usually the address that deployed it, is the controller. And usually that's like in our case, like when I deploy a contract, I'm effectively the controller of that contract. And even though the contract is on Ethereum, it's not really decentralized if one person can control the contract. So the immediate solution to solve that problem without really rethinking the whole architecture of the contract is to transfer that controller or the owner to a multi-sig wallet. So then, of course, the next question becomes, okay, who's going to be, like, just operationally, the next question becomes, who is going to be on that multi-sig wallet, and how is it going to be used, and how are decisions going to be made? And so all these questions, they arise, and we start to realize that there's like very simple things that it seems like they should be simple problems, but when you actually need to get things done, you realize that there's actually a good amount of issues. And so we also, long term, if we want to become a DAO, we really have to think about, well, if we have all these issues right now just using multi-sig wallets, where we're basically trying to create transactions by coordinating multiple people, and these are not even like a lot of people. Like the wallets we're testing right now are maybe between like 5 and 7 people. But if you want to have like a DAO where the entire organization or an entire community is involved in decision-making processes, you really need to think about, how do we get from where we are to there, right? And so, like, I don't know, what's the possible evolution between here and that and getting to a DAO? We don't know, but it's clear that we're still in pretty early days, because when we speak with people, and it's clear that there's just not that many people using multi-sig wallets. It's not something that's used very commonly, and it seems like at least that is going to start to change as more contracts get deployed and people realize what it means to actually, people start to take decentralization seriously. And I guess the other reason is, at least for now, why we're using multi-sigs and not just trying to deploy full-blown DAO systems, is because, well, I guess after the original DAO hack and where everything stands right now, it's just not proven as a security model yet. These things are still being tested and evaluated to see how these different DAO stacks, for lack of a better word, are secure. And again, security is it's sort of like a broad term, because you could have security from in the sense that the actual contracts don't work as expected, like they have some kind of bugs or security vulnerabilities that would allow a hacker to do something like drain all the funds from the wallet. But you also have things where you just may end up having some kind of like gridlock, where the contract technically functions the way it's supposed to, but it's just, it didn't account for coordination between all these different parties, and things just will never get done. And so, like, it'll just sit dormant, and it'll not actually create progress like it's expected to, because a lot of the coordination issues between all the parties haven't been solved. So those are some of the things that are starting to come to light now, and if we feel that those are some of the issues that need to be solved to be able to get to a DAO. And like, you know, the stepping stone there might be just more like distributed organizations, where you start to have these multi-sig wallets composed of multi-sig wallets, and you have like subsets of groups of people interacting with each other. And those are more complicated cases, but you can envision a future where that's like a stepping stone to full-on DAOs. Okay, so I actually should have showed the slide now while I was talking, but yeah, just to rehash, you have increased decentralization. Speaking about our specific wallet, which we've been testing, and you can join us in Multisig Evolution on Slack. Our mainnet wallet right now, it has 7 unique key holders. They're distributed globally among 7 different nations and 4 continents. So you can, that provides pretty robust, I guess, distribution and decentralization, you know, against, I guess, all kinds of different attack vectors. All right, and again, because in our case, we require, let's say, three signatures. If one of the key holders lost their key, that doesn't mean we've lost access to the multi-sig. So there's that disaster recovery, the benefit that it gives you. Whereas if just one individual held the key and they lost that key, well, we've basically lost access to that wallet that address. But with the benefits, there comes a lot of problems and that's really sort of what we want to highlight and get more people thinking about to figure out what are some possible solutions. And some of these a lot of them are like user experience solutions, but it requires a lot of ad hoc coordination, and we can demonstrate this in a bit, but effectively, in order to create a transaction in a multi-sig wallet, someone has to create the transaction, much like you might try to do in MetaMask or inside the status wallet. But unlike those wallets, the transaction doesn't immediately go through. It's then pending, and it's waiting on its additional confirmations. And once those confirmations come through, then it can be executed. But the question is, once you create that transaction, how do you gather all these people, especially when they're distributed, and make these kind of decisions in a timely manner? There's really no good way right now, and so it's been very ad hoc. It's been just pinging on Slack. It's kind of trying to marshal people around and getting things done that way. The interfaces for transactions in multisigs are pretty bad. They're definitely not designed for interacting with smart contracts. So in a dApp, for our multisig to execute a transaction, it involves us doing all kinds of funny stuff, like getting the data, and like sort of almost like a developer would debug it, getting it into a console, and then pasting the actual binary interface for a contract into the multisig wallet, and all the parameters for a function call of the contract, encoded as they should be, into the multisig interface. And then for the other signers, when they have to confirm that transaction, because the parameters and the data is encoded as it should be when it's submitted to the chain, it's just not human readable. It's very hard to read for the average person, which basically, that's actually a little bit of a security issue as well, right? But it's also, if you're asking people to confirm a transaction, how can they're just taking your word that that's actually the transaction it should be, if they can't clearly understand what the transaction they're confirming is. Also, the current wallet is limited to 50 key holders, and if we want to expand, that needs to be changed. But that compared to some of the other problems is relatively trivial. That could be expanded, but still, given today, even status, all of status, for example, wouldn't be able to use a single multisig. And just to sum all this up, it really just leads to exponential coordination costs. If you have a multisig wallet that requires 2 confirmations, compared with a multisig wallet that requires 3 confirmations, just our experience has been that it's been like to the third power harder to get 3 people to sign off a transaction than it is 2 people to confirm a transaction. So you start to get to like 5 people. It's just exponentially harder to get 5 people together coordinated to sign a transaction than it is to get 2, 3 people together. So those are really things to consider. And we really want to have everyone thinking about this to figure out ways we can improve these coordination issues. Okay, so I guess some of the things we just talked about, we can demo right now. I will share my screen. We'll try to do a live demo. If it fails, we have a pre-made recording, but we'll see how this goes. So just in the interest of time as well, we'll do a simple transaction where we just send the transaction, not a smart contract transaction. And so here we see our actual wallet interface. and I'm using our testnet wallet, so we're not sending real Ether, so no one needs to worry about that. Here we can see are the owners of the wallet, and because actually something that should be pointed out. I think one fundamental difference we didn't talk about before. Multisig wallets actually came first from Bitcoin. They're part of the Bitcoin protocol, but they're not in Ethereum. They're actually not part of the protocol. But that's okay, because in Ethereum we have something more general. We have smart contracts. So a multisig wallet on Ethereum is actually just a smart contract. So that allows us to do more flexible things, like actually change who the owners of a multisig wallet are, or add new owners to a particular multisig wallet, or replace them or remove them, which you could see from these options here are. So I'm going to try sending a little bit of ETH, which is actually held by the multisig wallet, to Richard, and I will just show how that might go. You basically have to create a transaction. So we'll add a transaction. I'll paste in Richard's address. Something to point out: if we were trying to do a smart contract transaction, we would have to paste the address of the smart contract and the actual ABI for that contract, and then from here pick the function that we want to interact with. And then once we pick that function, we'd then have to paste in the actual parameters, just to give a sense of sort of how much more complex it is to interact with a contract. And then of course the issue of actually getting those formatted parameters correctly pasted in, and everything that comes after that, verifying them, understanding them, so forth. So we'll just send, let's say, 1/10 of an ETH. And this part is very much just like using a standard wallet, right? We'll just confirm the transaction, and we have our confirmation in MetaMask, and we'll just confirm it. And the transaction was sent. Once it mines, it should be visible in the actual wallet. And then at that point, Richard would have to, there it is. So our transaction was mined. We see it's in the wallet. It has not been executed. It has one confirmation from myself. In our testnet wallet, we only require 2 confirmations for a transaction to go through. So now Richard can, Richard basically, or someone in the wallet has to, one of these owners has to come in and confirm this transaction for it to actually go through. Richard, do you want to either show how you're going to do that, or just go ahead and do it?
Yeah, I will share my screen.
Okay.
Please stop sharing your screen so I can. Okay, are you able to see my screen now?
Yep.
Cool. So let's go to our multisig wallet. We can see here that we have a transaction pending. It hasn't been executed yet, and only has one confirmation by the first owner. In this case, it should be Barry. I click on confirm. Oh, it's asking me for connecting my Ledger wallet. Let's do that. Okay, I'm entering the PIN code on my wallet. And then on my wallet, it says that I need to confirm an address. I would love to show you this, but okay. Let's click confirm and send transaction. It displays the basic transaction details like the gas limit price and the fees. Once we click on approve transaction, should appear on my Ledger wallet a dialog telling me to approve it. Let's try again. Once I confirm the transaction, on this side of the screen, you can see a little alert telling that we send the transaction to be mined. So we need to wait a few seconds for it to be mined. And now the transaction was mined successfully. And I should have received the .10 ETH. Okay.
Okay, cool. Back. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Sí.
Okay. Yeah, and that's just one of many different multisig type implementations. That was the Gnosis multisig wallet that we use, just because it's been around for a while. It's been proven, it's been tested, it's been audited, so we feel fairly secure in using it. But it's not the only one out there, and nor is it the sort of complete, obviously, because even Gnosis is evolving their own multisig by, for example, the Safe is them acknowledging one of the reasons for them building their next iteration, which is the Safe, is user experience, just creating a much better user experience for the wallet. But of course, there's other issues as well, such as gas fees. But I think that was one of their primary concerns, at least for Safe. So after all this, we can also talk about other things and what's next for multisigs. Well, obviously UX improvements and the current functionality is just low hanging fruit that seems like there's just a lot of areas to improve in. Just simple things like being able to interact with smart contracts in a straightforward way, the same way that you might interact just using the status wallet or MetaMask with the dApp, is definitely very desired. But you could also start to see other functionality that is not implemented, at least in these early versions of multisigs, that start to bring us closer to a DAO, right? Like, what about the opportunity for right now, you can basically either confirm a transaction or you can abstain from confirming it. Well, what about giving someone the option to deny a transaction, where now if somebody denies a transaction, now the threshold goes up. So if normally you require 2 confirmations, but if one of the key holders denies a transaction, well, now you're going to require 5 confirmations. So you could create some kind of rules like that. So those are some interesting areas to explore, which starts to bring us again closer to what we might envision, some kind of roles inside of a DAO, or perhaps some of the components inside of a DAO. Because again, we don't really know what that might look like today, but it might be a combination of all kinds of things for different types of organizational components. Stake-based voting is something to consider, right? In our case, it might be how much SNT does each key holder have in their wallet, and you may say need to get a certain percentage of the total SNT allocated to a transaction. For example, if one person holds, 30%, you need to have, let's say, more than 50% of the SNT that all the key holders hold allocated to a transaction. So if one person might hold 30% of that SNT, another person might hold 10%. And so some people will have more weight in their vote to approve a transaction, because really right now it's not so much a vote, it's really just a confirmation. But now we're talking about perhaps moving towards actual voting to get a transaction to go through. We could think about role-based rules, right? Maybe somebody who has a role of being, let's say, a finance manager only needs one other confirmation to do a transaction, as opposed to people who don't have that role. They might need 3 or 4, which is very common today in organizations. So it's easy to see that that's something that might be needed. Value-based rules as well, where this is something you usually see in organizations as well, where checks that have to be written over a certain size need multiple signatures. So same thing here, transactions over a certain size might need, let's say, 5 signatures instead of the normal 2 or 3. Same thing, maybe you could do value based on a time period, where over a given time period, if the value amount transacted in a multi-sig wallet exceeds some threshold, then the amount of confirmations needed goes up, right? So that's like setting some kind of value-based quota for a given time period, which again, you see in a lot of organizations today as well. There's like certain limits on what certain departments may be allowed to transact. And after that, they need additional authorization. Well, this is the same thing, but we can codify it in rules right into the multi-sig smart contract. So those are some things to think about. Those are also some things, worth exploring, and opportunities as well. Yeah, that's basically it. If you're interested in more, you could join us in Multisig Evolution. And if there's any questions or comments, we'll be happy to take them now.
Thanks, Barry. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So the first one is, when you said deploying contracts would be more decentralized with a multi-sig wallet, I mean, are you referring to contracts that have a specific role, whereby the person or the account that deployed the contract has access to specific functions?
Right, specifically about that case, because
Okay.
yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, it's a pretty common practice for there'd be, like in our case, for example, in our ENS subdomain registry, there's a controller of the contract, and the controller can do things like transfer the actual domain owned by that subdomain registry out of that registry. And if and at the time of deployment, that is, whoever deployed it, which generally speaking is just an individual, an address controlled by an individual, like the developer who might have deployed the contract. So by now by transferring the ownership of that, by changing who the controller is from the individual to a multi-sig wallet, now one individual can't do that. There has to be a this whole multi-sig process to execute that transaction without changing the actual smart contract. Because from the smart contract's perspective, it's still just one address is the controller, but that address happens to be a multi-sig wallet, which no one person has control over. So that already starts to decentralize it, because no one person is the controller of that contract any longer. I don't know, does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. That's going to lead to some interesting results. And then kind of further on that, what we saw now in the demo, I just wondered, like, how or who gets to decide to add or remove key holders? Because isn't that then centralizing the whole thing all over again?
So right now in this wallet, anyone can create a transaction to add or remove a key holder, but you're going to need the confirmations. You're going to need the other key holders to confirm that transaction as per the rules of that particular multi-sig. In our case, in that testnet case, it's one other confirmation. Yeah, but
That's awesome.
These are, again, since on Ethereum, multi-sig wallets are really just smart contracts, I think we have more flexibility in how we can design them, and we can definitely come up with more interesting rules.
And last one, but it seems like with regards to coordination costs, this would benefit pretty greatly from some kind of chat integration, and then based in that chat integration, notifications inside of chat. Is this something that you see that we could kind of put into extensions?
I mean, I agree with that. That's something we've talked about. I don't know if like extensions is the solution. It could be. You know, having maybe like a dedicated whisper channel around, having like a group chat around a particular multi-sig, that could be an option. I mean, there's like, right, it could be useful if you got like an actual status notification in your app when there's a confirmation pending. Yeah. So I don't know, there's a lot of different ways. I don't have an answer to this. That's part of the reason why we wanted to do this presentation. We want to bring everybody in and get more ideas about how we can solve these coordination issues.
And then I guess on that, sorry, everyone, lastly, is this something that we would have to then build into the existing status wallet? Or can we like bring this experience inside of status, but leverage other people's existing work?
Well, and I'll part of this is also I'd like to clarify, but currently, like the wallet we just demoed is independent of the status wallet, right? You could interact with it using the status wallet, but it doesn't need direct integration with it. Although to do a smart contract transaction on mobile using like status would, I think, be extremely difficult, like even significantly more difficult than it already is on desktop, just because of getting the actual parameters, pasting them in the ABI, all that stuff. Maybe to confirm it on mobile would be straightforward. The hardest part is creating the transaction. But there's definitely people thinking about it. I mean, something that I would love to see is for the user to be able to assume the role of the actual multisig when they're using a dApp. So like you can, like in MetaMask or in Status, you can choose which account you want to use. Why not be able to choose the multisig as an account, and you're browsing a dApp as a user of the multisig, and then it becomes really simple to create a transaction in the multisig when you're using a dApp. That's something I personally think would be helpful. But I don't know if that answered your question in full.
It did, yeah. Thank you, really. That was...
So this Mist wallet, it has support to multisig wallet. It's not the Gnosis one, it's the Ethereum Foundation, that one that was written by Gav Wood in the early days of Ethereum. Cool. It does exactly what you suggested, that you can take the role of a multisig wallet and interact with the apps, like in the Mist, or using that. I'm not sure if it still works, but because I didn't try it browsing the apps recently with Mist, but it used to work. And I suggest that this should happen for identities in status. So I see that there is these two things. There is a multisig that the purpose is to bring different individuals to sign a transaction. And there is also identity that do something that you mentioned, that is the two-factor authentication. So we plan to have the two-factor authentication with identities. So you could like have the status in your desktop and in your mobile. So to confirm a transaction, you might maybe need the confirmation from these two devices. So that's what I had to comment.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't even know about the Mist wallet. It's definitely something I should check out.
I also saw the Gnosis Safe new wallet, and they have some very nice improvements, like a multi-send command, which you can send a batch of transactions. For example, let's say that you want to do approve and a call for a ERC20 transaction. So you can specify in the submission of the transaction of Gnosis Safe multiple transactions to do in that order that you specify. So when everyone confirms, it executes in that order. So it's safer and of course cheaper if you batch this transaction, because you just have to pay once the minimal fee of a transaction. Also, they are also implementing gas abstraction, some kind of gas relay into their solution as well, as we are doing for status in DTs. So I think that maybe we should try to move on to Gnosis Safe when we find ourselves comfortable with its security and everything around it, because it seems like they are doing a great job. Maybe we can even contribute with them. Something about the gas relay that we are already very mature on.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I'm all forward for using the Gnosis Safe. I believe they already released. They're doing like two versions of it, right? One is for individuals for things like creating an identity and the two-factor authentication, which I think they already released. I think the only reason we didn't end up using it internally for testing is because the version for organizations, they're still testing and they haven't made the final release yet. I think that was our only hesitation. But yeah, as soon as they release the one for organizations, we'll be happy to start using it and yeah, contribute back and help evolve it as well.
So you said that it's really difficult to make a transaction in the multisig, Gnosis multisig. I totally agree with that, because that UI was not done for mobile. It's just start by that, so you see everything very zoomed out, like in a desktop. And yeah, in pasting an ABI, it's totally difficult. So we should do something about this for the states, for our users, because as you said in presentation, there is a lot of use cases for individuals, like a husband and a wife that want to share have a joint account. And that's just awesome. Like even this is like easier and safer than a bank. I see it that this way, because you have full control of you can open it anytime, you can change the participants of it. Also, something that we forgot to mention is also that we can develop in some recovery mechanisms for the multisig. That was more for identity, but we could also have. You also mentioned about voting. I think that we should go more for our democracy systems than mm-hmm. Like, don't make a contract like a mix into multisig in a democracy, in a voting democracy. I think that would feel a bit strange. I think we should use the multisig while we are testing our DAO systems, and once our DAO systems are proven safe, we move to control only non-critical parts of it, like usernames or like decoration of the apps, the app lists, decoration of tokens that are listed in or these things that are not really crucial, that would not break the foundation of status. Right. To start. Then when we see that everything is really safe, that we battle tested it, then we can move everything to this DAO.
Yeah, and those ideas that we posted there, when we talk about multisig evolution, we're not necessarily saying that the multisig itself has to sort of move in that direction, But the thing about I guess the real thing is also like with these DAO-based systems is they're so different from anything the average person, even the average just wallet user is used to, that explaining it and getting them to use it may be very complicated. It may just be such a large hurdle that they may never even use it. Whereas once they're already used to using a multisig, then you could say, hey, now we have for this particular contract, we're using this DAO-based system or this voting-based system, and you say, listen, it's basically like using your multisig, but you can now deny confirmations. Or I think it's really just a way of framing it to say that these other systems, once you get people using a multisig wallet, you can explain these other systems much easier to them because they already in their head understand how a multisig works. And they can now start to understand, oh, it's like a multisig, but with this one or two extra features, as opposed to if you just throw all those features of like liquid democracy or like some kind of DAO-based system at them, it may be so much that they just don't even know where to start and they just sort of don't even use it. But yeah, I think we're all sort of thinking in the same direction there. Also, you just jogged my memory. One thing we didn't even bring up, but as far as personal use cases, which there's not a good solution for right now in crypto in general, is estate planning. Like what happens when you die to your crypto assets? A lot of people, because some people have really good security, and the problem is that really good security will end up working against you when you pass away, because it's so good that nobody will get your crypto assets. They'll just be forever lost. And so with multisigs, it might be possible to design some kind of estate planning solution where maybe there's like the identity wallet, but maybe there's like some kind of a heartbeat function where after a certain amount of time of someone not interacting with that wallet, maybe something equivalent to, let's say, 2 years or a year or something like that, then other key holders are now able to access that wallet that person designated, like their family or so forth. So I think that could also be a pretty big one. I think just because the space is so young, there may not have been that many people that have like passed away that this has become an issue, or maybe the ones that have, maybe their family didn't even know that they had crypto holdings to pass on. And so this is not such a large issue that this is not even an issue people know that exists. But it's an issue with traditional assets. So why would it not be an issue with crypto assets as well? So
status should actually make some way that when we implement these identities, that people are encouraged to set up these security features to them. So like the friends recovery or this, as you said, dead man switch. It's cool things that are really important for social reasons, because like this locking these tokens is actually bad for the economy. Let's say if it's someone that is too rich gets all their tokens locked, you reduce the supply of these tokens that are in circulation. So you can, like in 100 years, maybe you don't have SNT available anymore because it's all locked somewhere. So it can be a problem. So we should think ahead to prevent these situations from happening. In what you said about DAOs looking like a multisig, I totally agree with you. I see that a multisig is like one account is a vote, but it's like a multisig, the DAO, but instead of an account is a token that is a vote, and the holder of the tokens sign for each token. So it's basically the same, and the amount of signatures needed is the quorum that we set up. So that's a really interesting discussion. I think we need a TED talk just about democracy and to point out all the solutions, how we can make this coordination in a decentralization autonomous organization.
Yeah, I think we all agree. I think the one I guess one thing that's really going to help move all this forward is as we get more people to use multisigs, I think it would be easier for them to understand the next steps and actually using things like liquid democracy and DAO-based systems. Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
I think I agree about the chat, about having a group chat for the multisig. There is an early feature from Status that was chat bots. We might want to resurrect that and bring that on to this feature, because this chatbot could be like the robot that is the contract, like, and every time an event is fired on that contract, then this robot will show a message in that group saying, oh, you need to confirm confirmation is required, executed or canceled, all these events. So we can make some that look like a user, but is a robot that respond over the events of the contract.
Right.
That would be perfect. So, but first we need to solve the problems to implement the group chats that are this private communication. How are we going to implement that? So once we have group chats, I think it's totally straightforward to implement this feature for our multisigs.
Yeah, I think that also echoes something that Graham mentioned, which is, I think extensions is going to be able to allow us to enable things like bots or build things like that. So yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, the problem of chatbots also is that you need a server to run it. So we don't use servers in Status. Instead, we use that decentralized Status nodes. So we're probably going to have these incentivized running bots, depending on the type of the bot. Because because the events, to receive an event, you need to be like synced in the chain and waiting for the events. Otherwise, you might miss the event.
Yeah,
so
I mean, another possible thing is that the light client of the actual wallet is somehow subscribed to those particular events of that multisig.
Yes, and when someone of that participants see, they can like emit the chatbot message. But I think that we actually would need something into the Status node running, because some contracts, like maybe you might even need some kind of automatic response to the event, and there is a lot of things to consider for the future of these chatbots. I think that we should open up these discussions again of chatbot, and I don't know when to implement that, because that's not a priority for Status right now. We have other things that are more important, but having the group chat for a multisig would be good enough. With only the events from the contract appearing in that group chat would be enough. That doesn't need status client, I guess, running like the status node interaction.
Just double check.
The light client.
As you guys were speaking, I attempted to open the link for the wallet inside of Status, because my wallet address is actually on the multisig wallet is my Status wallet account. So I guess I'm right that I can't just like open a link and use this Gnosis wallet. I have to download the software and then open that URL, right?
You can open it in your Status wallet. You can use what you do. You open wallet, go to the Gnosis, that link, and you need the address of the multisig wallet, and you paste there, and you enter the name of the wallet. worked fine for me. But as Barry said, it would be a bit difficult to add a new transaction, to meet a new transaction, but to confirm is really easy. I confirmed some transactions in the Multisig wallet using status, and it was easy. It's just press confirm and type the password in status, and it's done.
Very cool.
Yeah,
I'll post screenshots in the group.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is really creating smart contract transactions. I think if you want to also do a value transfer, like create a value transfer on mobile, I think that should be pretty straightforward also.
There is this also something we should consider. For example, that address field is just a text field. So maybe if the status wallet knew that was a address field, maybe it could load the addresses from the contact list. Maybe we can implement the contracts that the wallet knows. That should help, because right now there is no way to the Gnosis wallet requesting the contact list from status to appear in that. So maybe we should talk with extensions about that, and then that should, at least for value transfers, should be easier. And also ENS, of course, we're going to have ENS names also. So having supporting ENS in the address, maybe if you try to send a string to where an address is supposed to be, then status wallet can try to convert automatically to resolve it. Sorry. Yeah, I think it is this. Thank you for the presentation, Barry.
Yeah, thanks for all the ideas everybody's coming in with, and that's sort of the point of this presentation, is to start these discussions and get more people thinking about this. So yeah, any other questions, comments? Okay, well, if anyone does think of anything later on, you could certainly join us in the Slack channel. But thanks everybody, and we'll be speaking soon.